Hello and welcome back to the show. It's time for us to look at health issues because today is Health Tuesday. Now, we'll be looking at a very, very sensitive one that has to do with rape and the emotional trauma that comes with it. Now, to discuss this we have the founder of WARIF, Women at Risk International Foundation. Her name is Dr. Anita Kemi Dasilva-Ibru. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me on.
And well done for the fantastic work that your organization is doing.
Thank you.
All right, so now let's talk about this. We're looking at rape.
Yes,
when we look at the criminal code, when people talk of rape, they limit rape to just females because that's actually what the criminal code provides for. But your organization, what genders do you look at? Do you strictly restrict it to women? Because we've seen in more recent times that men have also been raped, even though that hasn't been incorporated into our criminal code or our criminal laws of Nigeria.
Well, this is true. Like you rightly said, most organizations, and when you talk about rape, most of us actually deal with the female gender. The reason for this is clear. We're the more vulnerable group. And statistically, when you look at the data tells you that 1 in 4 girls in Nigeria, by the time she reaches the age of 18, would have had one violent sexual encounter. And 70% of that number would have had more than one. Now with boys, valid, they also sadly have had these tragic events occur, but we're dealing with statistics of 1 in 10. So when we look at this problem, and we look at the problem, I guess, from ad infinitum, from back in the dark ages when women were and still being marginalized, the women and the young girls are usually the ones that we focus on because it's more prevalent in that gender group.
Now, we are in a society where it's very conservative and people like to, because of the stigma that comes with rape, they don't like to talk about this. We had a social worker from Lagos State Government a few weeks ago, and he gave examples of where victims' families would say, you know what, just hush, we'll deal with it our own way. Is it important for rape victims to talk about their trauma?
It is so vital. It is so vital because rape is more than just a physical act. It's more of a traumatic event. You strip the woman or the man, not just by losing a sense of trust or the very essence, but you're also gaining control over that individual. And there are far-reaching emotional aspects that would then be harmful to the psyche of that man or woman when this occurs. In our environment, and to be honest, globally, there is that stigmatization that comes with sexual abuse and rape. And so therefore, women aren't allowed to speak on it when it occurs. Very likely what tends to happen is because the narrative suggests that the perpetrator is usually a family member. Could be that husband, could be that father, that uncle, or that relative that's living in the house with the family. And so when this act occurs, and say the girl does go ahead and reports to the family member or the head of the family, if indeed the head of the family is not the perpetrator, because that could very likely be the scenario, then suddenly it becomes a family affair. Because this child or this young woman is now made to feel guilty, like it was her fault.
Blaming the victim.
Because suddenly the family are more concerned with the perception that would be given if this story should come out. But this young person is then left isolated with this awful event. And let's not forget, many a time, this is a repeated cycle.
Very true.
And so it's not just one isolated scenario. This is a child or a woman that is constantly, repeatedly being abused in that environment.
Now, you mentioned that 1 in 4 women before they get to the age of 18 in Nigeria would have experienced a domestic,
So we're told. So the UNICEF statistics of 2015 tell us.
Now, with WARIF, how many women have you had to work with or walk through your doors to seek help? Because like Menga mentioned, a number of women don't feel the courage to speak out.
Absolutely.
But how, I mean, what are the things that encourage a woman to come out, be bold and speak out, to come to you and say, well, I've just experienced this trauma?
Well, what we've found to be very effective is we have a 24-hour confidential helpline that's available. It's free, as with all our services actually at the center when women do come in. And we find that with the anonymity of a phone call, women do call in, sometimes to ask for advice, sometimes to speak on an act. And that's our opportunity to actually reach them and to express to them, like you said, that sense of well-being, that reassurance that, yes, if you do come in, it will be confidential. Yes, it will be free. And yes, you will be safe. Because sadly, like you said, breaking that stigma and having that woman, if you will, have the I guess you would call it empowerment, to be able to get up and speak on an act. And it takes a very brave woman.
And I think justice, when justice is served, is part of the healing process.
Absolutely.
Does your organization at any point work with law enforcement?
Yes, we do. What we do is the WARIF Center offers the immediate medical attention and the forensic medical examinations to young girls and women when they come through. We also offer the psychosocial counseling that we've spoken about, which is as important. We've been very fortunate to partner with the Washington, D.C. Rape Crisis Center. And so we had counselors from Washington, D.C. come to train our social workers and counselors. And so we were able to impact that knowledge base, not just to our social workers, but to the women in need. We also address social welfare, because in Nigeria, we're not a welfare country, and so we need that assistance as well. We've been very privileged to be made official members of the Lagos State Domestic and Sexual Violence Response Team. And so by working alongside the government and government agencies, as well as private organizations, we're able to offer social welfare assistance, like with accommodation and shelter, especially when the home environment is the house of risk or the home of risk. And as you made reference to, legal aid and law enforcement in scenarios where, you know, the young lady would like to proceed with and move forward and take the perpetrator to court.
Now, our society, in some way, sometimes have taken rape very trivially. We've seen comedians come out to joke about rape, and then people climb down on them, and then they come back to apologize. Now, some people don't understand how difficult it is to have been raped. In fact, some people would say it's only traumatic or traumatizing if the woman had never had sexual encounters with a man before. But if she's sexually active, if there was a comedian recently who just said, if she's been sexually active before, she should just take it as one of her sexual escapades and not try to fight with the rapist. From your perspective, you've come in contact with tons of these women who have been raped. Can you give us an insight to just how traumatizing this is?
It's a sad reality that our environment, as you said, does encourage the trivialization of these acts. And it's also a sad reality that women are marginalized in our communities. A whole issue of consent is another aspect that a lot of people don't seem to appreciate. I mean, the fact that a woman says yes and decides to change her mind suddenly is seen as, you know, an act that is wrong, because if she had apparently alluded to the act or given the impression, then she has no longer the right to change her mind. If she's under the influence of alcohol, perhaps, or of substance, then she obviously has no place or recollection in being able to give her consent. If she's asleep, same, how is she going to give her consent? And then if she's underage, and the Nigerian laws state that 18 and below is that of a minor. And so, no, you can't say that that 17-year-old or that 15-year-old gave her consent, because by law, she's a minor. Yes. So these are the aspects that, unfortunately, people aren't either aware of, or, as you said, in certain communities and in certain areas, are trivialized. And this is what we need to change. This is what we need to speak on. This is where wonderful platforms like this and others need to reiterate and inform and give the women as well the assurance, so they can then sit up and actually acknowledge that, yes, actually, this is wrong. And no, I'm no longer going to sit quietly and allow this to happen.
All right, I'm great you mentioned the platform where people can actually listen. There are a number of people who are listening from the urban areas and even in some rural areas as well.
Right.
We know some people act out of ignorance, particularly family members of victims of rape. Right. Now, how would you advise family members, mothers, fathers, who have to deal with the stigma or the shame of having a child being raped and supporting that child to getting back, you know, to be
full recovery,
full recovery or as close as possible?
So they need the assistance of foundations like us, like WARIF.
Yes.
They need the assistance of social workers that are specifically trained to address this traumatic event. They need the assistance of their family. Yes. They need the support of their family. They need the love of their family. Just being present, physically sitting next to a person that believes that this individual is here because they believe what I've said and what I'm going through speaks volumes.
What about situations where there's certain women who are now blaming themselves? We see that in most cases of abuse, the women tend to think it's their fault. And the society also tends to blame them. We've seen situations where a girl goes to visit a guy innocently, they're friends, and the guy rapes her. And they say, why did you go to his house? You know?
Which is many a time what the narrative is. They turn around and then they blame the victim.
Woman, yeah.
They blame the survivor, and they say, well, why were you there?
Why did you wear
why did you wear that dress, or why did you wear that short skirt,
that
for
actually
instance?
Excuse the act?
Clearly not. I mean, I think all of us sitting here
Agree.
I think over 1,000% agree that clearly not. And that's another thing that we need to shout from the rooftops.
Yes.
It has absolutely nothing to do with what you wear. It has nothing to do with actually what you say, to be honest.
I actually like something she mentioned earlier about the fact with regards to consent. You mentioned
Yes.
that if someone says
Yes,
and then says
and it
no,
changes her mind.
in uni they taught us when we're doing criminal law, they taught us that while in the act, if a woman says stop, any further penetration is rape.
That's rape, absolutely.
But it's just that it's become very difficult to prove.
Yes.
Now, in cases where a woman just got raped, what should she do?
And to add to that, what are the tips from recovering from post-rape trauma?
So if she gets raped, if it's a sad event, the hardest thing to do is not to shower and not to bathe. Because immediately what you want to do is wash away this shameful, awful act. But from a forensic standpoint, it's actually important for us to see you immediately. Because there are, of course, specimen retrieval that's important in not proving that not were you only attacked, but identifying who the perpetrator is. And so it's extremely important that within the first 72 hours that you're seen in a sexual assault referral center, such as the WARIF Center, so that the forensic medical examination can be carried out. And then you have the necessary tests that also need to be carried out to rule out infections, specifically HIV. Because again, when you've had an unprotected encounter, there is a protocol that's in place with the use of HIV drugs that have to be administered. And they have to be administered again within that window. And so these are all the important aspects of the post-care of a survivor that has had an awful attack or assault occur. In terms of tips, we spend so long and so many hours talking about all the things that she shouldn't do. She shouldn't wear a skirt that's short. She shouldn't go out after dark. She shouldn't have that extra drink, perhaps. The truth is, we should spend more time teaching the perpetrator what not to do. Exactly. That's what the tip is. The tip is not about her. The tip is educating your children, boys, your male siblings, educating them on what's right and what's wrong, telling them the no means no. You gave a good example that we talked about earlier. That's what the tip is. The tip is not trying to justify her position in the community. The tip is actually to stop that perpetrator from attacking her in spite of all of that.
Now, it's been a very fantastic conversation. Thank you very much for what you're doing.
Thank you.
How can people get across to your organization if they want to report cases or they want to partner with you? How can
Or have questions?
Well, the WARIF Center is in Yaba. The address, I'm assuming, has been on the ticketed
It's been on the screen, and the helpline also has been scrolling on the
So
TV
it's
screen.
number 6 Turton Street, and that's off Thurban Avenue in Yaba. We have a 24-hour confidential helpline. It's 0809 021 0009. I mean, please call anyone. We're happy.
Any age,
anybody.
any age restriction.
No age
whether it's your
restriction.
husband, your family member,
No gender
cousin.
restriction.
We do have a gender restriction. The reason being that the WARIF Foundation focuses on young girls and women. But having said that, I mean, a crime's a crime and an act is an act. We're certainly not turning away anyone in need
And you
of
could
care
refer
and
them
services.
to appropriate
And then we can
authorities.
thereafter refer them exactly to organizations that might be better able to assist.
Do you
Well,
have
we've-
opportunities for volunteers?
Absolutely. We have a website, www.warifng.org. We have a nice full page where please give us all your details. I'll be looking out for yours.
Yes, I will.
And we welcome or everyone that's willing to assist
All right, wonderful.
from all walks of life.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you on
Thank
Hello
you so
Nigeria.
much for having me. That's
Thank
very
you very
kind.
Thank you for joining us.
All right, then.
We've been speaking with Dr. Anita Kemi Dasilva-Ibru, who's a founder of WARIF, Women at Risk International Foundation, and she's a specialist obstetrician and gynecologist with a medical background that tends to public health. Thank you for speaking so robustly about what to do to prevent rape and how to deal with post-rape trauma. We're going to break now.